Hello and welcome to Quarantine Zone, a podcast for HBO's The Last of Us. We're your hosts, Andrew Sorsini,
Dwayne D,
and Tosin Andy.
We just watched the third episode of the second season of The Last of Us titled The Path. We assume you have as well. Total spoilers ahead, so let's dive into the aftertalk. But first, we've got some online spots where you can get in contact with us. You can write to us or email us a voice memo at quarantinezonepod@gmail.com. Follow us on X and Blue Sky at QZPod. Add us on iTunes, Spotify. Like us, leave us a review. That's how we get noticed. But the best thing really you can do is spread the word and tell everybody about us. This episode, The Path, was written by Craig Mazin and directed by Peter Hoare, who had previously directed episodes of It's a Sin, The Umbrella Academy, Daredevil, and I just saw his name on the first new episode of Doctor Who's new season. So he gets around. Dwayne, why don't you give us a recap of this episode?
All right, recap in hopefully 2 minutes or less. So we don't normally talk about the opening sequence much, the intro, but it's worth noting that for the run of the show up until season 2, episode 2, the opening credits sequence ends with two silhouettes, like Ellie and Joel. And this time it ends with one silhouette, so Ellie seems to be walking alone. The episode opens in the aftermath of the infected attack on Jackson. There's sorrow and mourning as the survivors care and prepare the dead. Tommy washes Joel's body. Joel is just one of many bodies in whatever they're using for a morgue. Meanwhile, the hospital's humming with activity as the wounded are being cared for. We find Ellie bandaged and waking up after some medical procedure. Seems like she might have, punctured a lung or something. She starts screaming as she relives Joel's death in front of her eyes. The trauma is so bad she has to be sedated. The scene skips to Jackson 3 months later as rebuilding takes place. Rebuilding without Joel, the construction manager. Jesse and Tommy are working on something. You can see Jesse is younger and stronger, and Tommy notices it. We find Ellie in the hospital. She's being discharged. She's ordered to talk to Gail before she leaves, and it's clear that she's hurt, but she doesn't want to confront it. And Gail lets her leave. She arrives back at the house that she shared with Joel, and there's a memorial of flowers and notes on the fence, sort of like what happens when there's an accident or someone gets murdered and people create the scene of the crime. They put like a memorial stuff there. It's the sentiments of the townsfolk who missed and loved Joel. As she tours her old house, she sees what Joel left behind. Wood carvings, half finished. There's a box on his bed left there by Tommy of the personal effects that were on him when he died. In it are his watch and his revolver, which Ellie holsters in her pants. She cries as she encounters Joel's closet and rubs her face on the clothing hanging there, presumably smelling his scent. Dina comes to visit and tells Ellie that she knows where they're heading, Abby and the team that killed their Joel. She tells her that they were from the WLF, the Washington Liberation Front. She believes, from what she remembered of Abby's team's internal discussions, that the two of them can exact revenge on Abby all on their own. Tommy says he wants to support Ellie's idea of taking a posse to Seattle to take down Abby and the WLF. Jesse is on the council. He recommends that Ellie write down her feelings and ask for justice because, they are nothing if they won't defend each other. The council votes, and when the council votes counted, the measures voted down. There will be no posse sent to Seattle to get justice for Joel. Tommy believes that Ellie might go down the same path that Joel was on, lashing out. But also, Gail thinks that Ellie was always on that path. We meet a cult of people on the Seattle Trail. It's a hiking trail near Seattle. They all have scarification on their cheeks, and the men have bald heads while the women wear their hair braided in a crown. They use hammers as weapons, and their cloaks are marked with symbols, and they are on the run from the WLF. Ellie and Dina sneak out of at the old East Gate at 3 a.m. with Seth's help. This is the day after the council meeting. Seth is the dude who called them dykes during New Year's Day, but he said he was sorry, and it seems that he meant it. Ellie has no idea how to get to Seattle. Dina seems to have spent the last 3 months preparing a strategy. The duo visit Joel's grave on the way out of the area. The ladies stop at an outcropping in the forest during a rainstorm and discuss their kiss back during New Year's Eve. They also come across a dead member of the cult we saw earlier in the episode. Turns out that the WLF came across the cult and massacred them, even the children. Abby seems to have lied about the WLF not hurting those who can't defend themselves. As they approach Seattle, the camera shows a street. Armored personnel carriers drive by, followed by a mass of heavily armed people on the march. It appears that Dina's assessment may have been incorrect. Taking out Abby seems to be at least as challenging as Abby's little team felt when they were taking on Jackson. And that's the episode.
Thank you for the recap. So let me ask you right off the bat here, what were your impressions of this episode?
I mean, I think they made some significant changes from the game, but just like with last episode, these changes make the storytelling a bit more realistic, which is kind of necessary for the wider audience that the show is going to reach, as opposed to sort of the more narrow audience of the game. And I feel like this audience, when you're watching it, you're not like eager to play the next mission. So you can have a big time skip like this. You can kind of play around with how people are feeling and the stuff with Gail and all that. But despite the changes, the episode wasn't the slow burn I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be more dealing with the trauma, talking to everybody, maybe even confessionals from random people in the town, but it wasn't that at all. I think the human drama is pretty well managed. The plot action moves a lot more quickly than I thought it would. And I got to say, I really enjoyed it. Tosin, what about you?
I think this really was the calm before the storm episode. And
you don't think the first episode was the calm before the storm?
I think the first episode, honestly, the first episode felt like there was quite a bit of storm, but this is the calm before the second storm, right? You had the outer skirts of the hurricane, and now there's the eye, and now you're going to get the other aspect of the hurricane as you go through.
Okay, that's pretty good. All right. Tell me what you mean by that.
Yeah, I think one thing that is quite different from the game is the pacing, right? In the game, there was no time to dwell on the passing of these individuals. You were already moving forward with your mission to track down Abby. And
right, it's a game. And then there's also, you don't have to recover because it's a game, right? Like the characters are sort of like almost superhuman.
Right. And I think while this episode does do some, does jump a bit from, quickly from Jackson to Seattle very quickly, right? That's a pretty long journey, but they managed to do it pretty shortly in the time.
It's 800
provided.
miles or something like that. And I don't know how they don't give you a time estimate. Like they give you the 3-month time skip, but they don't give you the time skip. I did the calculation. If you were on 2 horses, that is, each horse can carry your gear and carry you, and thus slow down less and rest less, it would take about 8 to 10 days. On 1 horse, I think we can talk about 1 horse later, but it would take longer.
Yeah, but and in either case, you do some of these things to move the story along and not necessarily to have various side missions and things of that nature, which is kind of a positive. But I do think that overall, from a feeling of that episode, there was time to develop the characters a bit more, and you could still feel that anticipation of what comes next, especially for someone who's familiar with the story. So it was a unnerving pause, but also a good one.
Yeah, I thought this was a solid, connective episode to get us between different phases of our journey. I think last week, Dwayne, you said off mic that you hope that the rest of the season isn't going to be after last week's episode. You hope that the rest of the season wasn't going to be slow and boring by comparison. And I got to say, last season's episode was a really high bar. It's really hard to top everything that went down in the episode Through the Valley.
Totally.
In a way, this was a little bit of a breather, of a chance for everyone to take a breath and sort of get our ducks in a row and figure out what we're going to do. I'm not
Yeah, a breather, but not boring.
Not boring at all, but just
Like
very.
Battlestar Galactica season 3 after episode 4, boring.
Or Buffy the Vampire Slayer, any episodes after season 5.
Yeah, after The Gift, it was like, why are we here? Oh, musical. Okay.
I thought you were gonna say any episode.
No.
Okay.
I love
I'm kidding. I
Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Don't get me wrong. This is just a solid. It's connective tissue. You know, we're stringing narratives together. So this is
building episode.
Building episode. Yes, absolutely. That's what I'm looking forward to. Having no knowledge of what's coming, I'm looking forward to, what I'm anticipating seeing coming up. It's the ongoing confrontation, the impending confrontation between Ellie and Abby that's keeping me going.
Yeah, I kind of wish I was in the room with you when you saw some of this stuff, because since you have no idea what's going on.
Right.
Just to see your face.
Yeah.
That'd be kind of nice.
I will tell you that there were 2 moments in this episode that just broke me. Like, absolutely broke me down to tears.
Oh, okay. All right. Everyone take a deep breath. Everyone's going to tell us what broke them.
And the first was like right off the bat with Tommy cleansing Joel and then telling him to give Sarah my love. For me, it was like the first 10 minutes of Up, Pixar's Up. It was just like, I was just a blubbery mess at the end of that. I mean, that's...
Did you pause it? Did you pause the show?
I did pause it a little bit just to...
Okay, legit.
Just to collect myself.
Just so people know, I watch the show. If something's about to happen, I'm anticipating, if I get anxious, I pause it. If I get emotional, I pause it.
Yeah.
Poor wife has to wait until I'm there.
Right, because you legit need time to collect yourself, to like collect your emotions, right?
Totally. And these editors want to squeeze it into 50 minutes. And you're like, guys, come on.
Yes, no kidding. And so also like it kind of sort of that the opening titles, with that ends with Ellie's lone silhouette at the end of that also was like, we're shit is going down. We're really in serious territory now.
Yeah, they don't change opening titles normally in most shows. Yeah. It costs money that they don't want to spend. So that's real. Also, a lot of people in today's world, it's a streaming show. It has a skip button. A lot of people don't even notice that. Yeah. So I'm glad we both picked up on that because it is, I think, pretty significant.
And the other moment that really broke me was Ellie's Brokeback Mountain moment with Joel's jacket when she is hugging and sniffing the jacket. It's like, it's like, I mean, literally, it's like right out of the movie Brokeback Mountain, but that's okay.
Yeah, it was a good reference.
It's earned in this case, right?
Yeah, totally. It was homage.
Yeah.
A copy. I think that was pretty good. Also, the thing that makes that work a lot is, they put this foundation in that Ellie's a liar. They put this foundation in that she's not in touch with her emotions. And she's sitting there tearing up on his shirt. And it's visceral. She's obviously, his scent is on those clothes still. They're all like rough spun, kind of like wool kind of things. Right. And it's just like this kind of stuff where she, it's what's left of him.
It's a rare moment of vulnerability for Ellie.
Rare moment of vulnerability. And she hasn't seen his gravesite. She never got to see his body. She wasn't there during the funeral. That's it.
Yeah.
So like imagine losing a parent and then suddenly they were really gone. Like nothing of them is around. And luckily all you have left is what's been hanging in their house, your house.
Yes.
Which she moved back into, which is a thing.
Yeah, that's crazy. Like I don't even know. I'm surprised at the level of sensitivity and the level of like emotional sorrow that is in this episode, knowing that it's from a video game, like knowing that that's also in the video game. It's gotta be, right? That's not just something made up for the show.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that cutscene's in the game. The thing is, I mean, you're right. I think the visual storytelling is very powerful there. They don't have to have a whole bunch of expository conversations. Like Dina doesn't have to come in with Ellie crying on her shoulder.
Right.
It happens
Right.
before Dina comes in. And of course, to keep character, when the door is knocked on, when Dina knocks on the door, she suddenly has to
compose herself.
Exactly, hide it all. And that was big. That was moving. I think anyone watching that didn't feel that needs to go see Gail.
You have some thoughts about Gail.
Yeah, I do. So Gail, right? We have Ellie's chat with Gail, and Gail's like, well, you guys may not have been on the best terms, or whatever. And she's like, well, your final moment doesn't define your whole time with them, is what Ellie says. And Gail's like, it shouldn't, but it often does. So what was great about that is, I don't know where Ellie learned her, armchair psychotherapy situation, but she's acting like a kid who's watched a lot of Family Matters and these shows that were on TGIF 30 years ago, or that kind of thing, and she's talking as if she's watched all of those shows, or read a whole bunch of books, or whatever it is.
The last 5 minutes of Party of Five, or
exactly every
Dawson's
episode of Party of Five, the last 5 minutes of them, exactly. And she just drops it. I'm like, where did she get that? A, she's 19. B, what's up with that? And then the second thing is, when Gail says, they're both saying things that are true, but they're not telling the truth. So Ellie's like, your final moment doesn't define your whole time with him. And that is true. But we know that for Ellie, she's upset that she didn't have the greatest final moments with him. We know that because of how she was talking to Jesse last episode. She really wanted to see him, right? When Gail says it shouldn't, but it often does, and that's Gail telling a complete truth, right? Because when in the case of Ellie, there is a definition there, and it's not the definition. The definition isn't of. She's not necessarily. Well, she might be. Gail is talking about Ellie having walked up to the house, looked at Joel playing the guitar, and not talking to him. In reality, the moment that defines her whole time with him may very well be when she crawled onto his back and felt his final breath, right? So for Ellie, that final moment is different than what Gail knows, because nobody really knows except for Jesse, who found her, and Dina, who I guess would have woken up or whatever. They're the only ones who know how Ellie really experienced Joel's final moments, aside from Abby's crew who saw it when they were leaving. So I feel like that's why she's motivated to quickly go out and try to murder Abby. But as Dina says cleverly, if all you know is where someone's going, you should give them time to get there.
Right.
So that's helpful.
Clever.
It's really interesting watching Ellie have these issues trying to process, but also acknowledging what's going on to Gail, right?
Yeah, totally.
But at the same time, sweeping it under the rug. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, she's trying, I don't know, to be strong or whatever. There's this thing, and I feel like I might have been saying it before, but our society is it hates weakness so much. It wants to see strength, even if that strength is misbegotten, even if that strength is formed with actions that are evil. But in the case of Ellie knows this. She knows that being weak isn't what it's about. Even for herself, she's been indoctrinated with the idea that Joel was strong, I got to be strong. Life is tough, I got to be tough. And so she won't even get into with herself her actual emotions about having lost Joel, right?
Right.
And her way to deal with it is to quickly kill Abby, and obviously this is not going to be quick.
Yeah.
Abby got the luck of a lifetime when it just so happened that Joel saved her from the zombies, and she didn't have to go into Jackson. But it's pretty clear that's not going to be the situation with Dina and Ellie. So anyways, I'm sorry, Tosin, you were going to say?
No, all I was going to say is the other point is that she's also trying to justify aspects of her feelings and interactions in her mind and get other people to say, yeah, you're right. she has that conversation with Gail where she's like, your final moments with someone doesn't define your entire time with them. And it's kind of like she's pleading with Gail or asking Gail to like confirm that the way that she left with Joel, those bad elements didn't actually completely, like, she knows to herself that it didn't mean that it wasn't what was their totality of the experience together. But
does she know that?
Well, in her mind, it isn't. But
I think she's trying to convince herself
Joel,
as much as she's trying to convince.
Yeah, I think she's trying to convince herself that Joel didn't feel that way.
Yes, exactly.
Because you have that conversation, and then, as you mentioned, walking through the light and dark of the hospital as that changes the expression on Ellie's face as she's progressing. But then she goes immediately to the house where she realizes, like, hey, this is the room I left. I pulled out the mattress. I was no longer, your bed is seen as a place of safety often. And that was sanctuary. No longer in that sanctuary is no longer in his house. It was, in the garage. It's off elsewhere. She had left him. And she had also left him on his, before she got there, when he was dying, and was not there to kind of comfort or save him. So I think there's a lot of that dynamic that's going on there too.
Yeah, it sounds like you're describing regret, and Ellie is probably confronting regret for only really the second time in her life, right? The first time was when she lost her best friend, so much so that when Dina asks about the people she's killed, she's like, I can't even talk about the first one. But this regret she feels around Joel, like, Joel was there. And like so many young people, she just kind of assumed Joel would always be there, right? And so when he's not there, and she's like, "Shit, I left him. I was in the garage. I wouldn't talk to him about anything. I had these attitudes, and part of her problem with Joel seems to be like Joel's incredible strength, like his ability to kill 18 people to pull her out of the hospital,
right?
When Gail's like, what did you do to her? He's like, I saved her. It reminds her of her own internal weakness, that this guy had to come and save her. And when you look at her personality, she's not interested in being a damsel, right? When it comes even to her relationship with Dina, she thinks of herself as the tough one. So she has all this regret because she's trying to be all tough. And in the process, she loses connection with the one person that actually understood her, her kind of pseudo father, Joel. So she's going through this regret, which is another reason why she's so motivated to go after Abby now, sort of like prove herself that, hey, I'm going to do justice for Joel, but also I'm going to prove to myself that I'm tough enough to do this. Like I can take on his mantle. And it's tragic even before we get there, right?
You know what I thought was interesting about that interaction with Gail is that, like, Ellie is holding this deep-seated grudge against Joel, and we know why, and Joel knows why. But when Gail tells Ellie that Joel wanted to say, I'm sorry, and because he wronged her, Ellie can't externalize what she can't even fathom what it is that Joel was talking about how he's wrong.
Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Right. And it seems genuine.
Yeah.
It seems genuine that she doesn't know what Gail's talking about, which means Joel had something in his mind that died with him, maybe. And what's also interesting about that is that, Ellie was unconscious when he saved her. So whatever Joel is thinking about when he says, I saved her and that was the problem.
Well, it's that last
everything to do with what he told her when they got out.
Yeah, it's that last scene in the end of season 1 where he lies to her and she knows that he's lying to him, to her. So but I don't know why she doesn't put two and two together and realize that that's what Joel wanted forgiveness for wronging her about.
Yeah, it's a weird thing because this is kind of what makes the show good. Like I was reading this book series called the Empyrean series, and it's not written fantastically well, but I will say the one thing the author gets right is the internal drama, like the ability for people to realistically not be able to say the thing that needs to be said, which causes the drama that makes you want to like continue watching the story, right? Like at what point is Ellie going to be able to reconcile her feelings, get it out? At what point is Gail going to reach catharsis by having Ellie explain it? Or are we going to have catharsis as an audience by it coming out in a way that Dina understands or Tommy understands or whatever? And to get back to Tommy, Gail has a chat with Tommy and she's basically like, Ellie's a liar. And then Tommy's like, well, Ellie was walking this path of destruction. She got it from Joel. And Gail's like, no, she didn't get it from Joel. She's just who she is. And I don't know if what Gail was saying is true, that most things about people are nature and not nurture. I just might be useful for the show. And, Gail's a human being and Gail has her own, biases and so on. I'm not going to take a show to be actual like therapist gospel. But, the thing is, the situation that they're all in is a shitty situation. And there are only so many ways to manage it. Joel's way was to become the baddest person around to the point where everyone's afraid of him. And Ellie has a role model in that. So I think that does have something to do with it. But they also are two birds of a feather when it comes to not wanting to show their weaknesses and show their traumas. So I think that's a thing. Ellie, they're like puzzle pieces, right? Ellie lost her family. Joel lost his daughter. Boom. But I'll say this for Ellie. This season, she's been unlikable, entitled, a jerk. Like at the end of, she's leaving at 3 a.m. at the gate.
Yeah.
And Seth has to insist that she takes his gun because her gun sucks compared to his gun. And she has to like grudgingly take the gun. And then they're on the horse and they're going. And Seth is like, bye. And, Dina's like, thank you. And he has to reach out his hand when he's done everything that a person could do to help them, right?
Yeah.
Aside from Dina, who actually made the strategic plan and acquired Seth's expertise and his willingness to help them. And Ellie can barely even reach out her hand to say goodbye, right? Like that's I know she's being true to character. I'm not mad at like Bella Ramsey. I'm not, none of that's happening here. But like she's our person as watchers. She's our protagonist, so we are with her. But fuck if I could be a friend of hers. You know what I mean? And it's hard to see Dina being like, Dina comes across as relatively sweet. I know she's got limited options there, but still, it's just kind of like, she's unlikable. Ellie, in this moment, in these 3 episodes, Ellie has been totally unlikable, and you have to love that you still like her.
In this respect, with Gail acknowledging that Ellie is a liar and Ellie showing off basically antisocial qualities, she reminds me.
You sound like a father.
She reminds me a lot of Lyra Silvertongue from the Golden Compass series, which also had a successful adaptation on HBO. Who is this person who is legitimately a anti-hero and a brat and a liar. Also, they call her Silvertongue in the show, and has a lot of qualities that are not appealing, and yet this is your person. This is who we got. Your hero of the show.
We'll see. The game does a lot of interesting things with this regard on who is a hero and who's not. Kind of similar to what some of the things that we discussed in like season 1, like what is right and what is wrong, and who, those lines are all sort of blurred. So I think that is something that we'll see whether or not the series decides to sort of tackle that. But the one thing I want to mention is, like, although Ellie holds grudges, I think part of that is her stance, similar to like what Joel was, that she had to be enforcer and she can't show any weakness in front of others, right? She's wiping her tears away before going down. While we know that other people like Dina is okay being vulnerable in front of her. Dina, shed some tears in front of her in the table. Dina has also thrown up in front of her as well too, right? So like, there are different ways of demonstrating sort of who you are as a character, and who knows, maybe as the story progresses, Ellie will either find peace or find the ability to express herself emotionally as she sort of ages
via death and destruction.
Well, maybe it is through death and destruction, but maybe it's through other means.
Sure,
we'll see.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so to get to I want to actually like piggyback right on what you said. This just brings up the fact that Gail is a good addition to the story here on the show. Like, there are all these shows that have, or TV, or like books or video games or even anime where characters go through incredible trauma, right? Like Full Metal Alchemist. You got these like kids seeing their friend's daughter get turned into a dog. You got Asuka in like Evangelion, who basically is so repressed and has so much riding on who she is that she like goes berserk, and Shinji goes berserk all the time. And you don't actually talk about the mental trauma that's dealt with in these shows. We just watch characters act out, and we have to kind of put it together. And there's a narrative value in that, in a viewer or a reader or whatever who's observing the story, seeing a character act out in what could be otherwise a crazy way out of context, and having to put the context in there and put it together why they act like this. But with Gail in the show, we've got trauma, we've got mental health problems because of it, and they're talked about. She's bringing it up. She's talking about how people might react to these traumas, right? She's trying to dig into trauma. She's asking the questions that the audience itself wants to ask. And so as a character that's not in the game, but is in the show,
yeah,
I think it's a brilliant move. And it's a brilliant move not just because the writing is there. The writing's great. But I feel like in this show, even more so than others, the performances are bringing the writing to a whole new level. The writing almost feels sparse, but the performances, like Tosin was just talking about how Dina expresses her vulnerability. It's not all in words. It's in how she's pushing the cookies across the table. It's in how she's taking that bite. It's Ellie. It's her stare, like Bella Ramsey's ability to kind of have this sour face. This very, and she's what, like Scottish or something, or like Northern English, and she is coming across as very much so many American children,
right?
And you just really believe it, right? And so I feel like that's really helpful. But with Gail there, we're actually able to sort of articulate, or Gail's able to articulate for us the frustration that a character could be feeling, right? Because Joel went to Gail, and we know Joel was uncomfortable doing it. Obviously, Ellie is uncomfortable doing it. But I think we got like the idea that Dina did talk to Gail, and Dina seems somewhat more socialized than the others. So I think Gail's super useful in terms of this. And I know she's not going to be in every episode, especially now that we're in Seattle and stuff.
Right.
But I think as the actor who's playing Gail is
Catherine
O'Hara. She's doing a great job of being someone who's going through her own trauma and still able to help us understand some aspect without spelling it out for us, without being super expository, the trauma the others are going through. So just kudos to the showrunners for deciding that character needed to be inserted in there, for giving us this sort of like, if there's anti-heroes, she's like anti-exposition, Right. So it's good. Also, these anti-heroes we're talking about, back in the day, an anti-hero was like Clint Eastwood in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. He didn't talk much.
Sure.
It was pretty selfish. Now an anti-hero is like so much more like badass and uncomfortable and like psychologically complicated. And, it's compelling. As much as I'm like, Ellie's an unlikable, entitled jerk, she's compelling. And I need to know why she's doing what she's doing. I need to know.
I want to talk a little bit about world building, continuing the world building. I was surprised in this episode to see in that softball game with Gail, watching from the outside, how many children there are in Jackson, like enough to have two different softball teams. I mean, I think that's a testament to
Yes, that was awesome.
how comfortable it almost felt when that scene started. I'm like, is this a flashback? Are we going in the before times? But no, I mean, I think it's
in the Quiet Place, that would be a flashback to the before times,
right?
Like that's exactly what the flashback was. But now, because Jackson is so
civilized,
it's civilized. It's a community. Yes, they've suffered losses, but they're a real community and they're moving ahead. And that's why when you see Jesse working with Tommy, and Jesse is the up and coming adult who still has like the strength of youth, but he's also got the maturity to be on the council at his age. It just goes to show that Jackson has a future. And unlike every other post-apocalyptic thing we've ever seen, like Fallout, there's no future.
Right.
The Walking Dead, there's no future. The Road, the movie based on the book by Cormac McCarthy, featuring Vigo, there's no future. But Jackson is a glimmer of a hope of a future, which means if it falls, we're going to be really depressed. Whereas when you look at what we saw of Seattle, and granted, we only saw a snippet and we only saw their fighters, it didn't seem like a future. The people they killed had a lot of kids with them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The cultists had a lot of kids with them, and those kids were killed. And you would think, whether it's a Negan character or the governor in The Walking Dead or any other kind of like leader of a militarized group, when you see the children, you got to be smart enough to see the future. Right. And you take the children with you. But nihilistically, they've killed the children. So that, to me, is crazy. Like, what is the Washington Liberation Front liberating?
Right. Well, this is like I have a few questions that we usually save until we get to the unanswered questions section of the show. But I really want to know, and maybe this is just a thing that is very clear to everyone who's played the game. But I really want to know what it is about the WLF. I mean, how is killing children a good strategy for them? To your point of like, you want to in any other normal, like in the Mad Max post-apocalyptic world, they take the children and then they adopt the children as their own, and then they become the new war boys or whoever,
Exactly. Yeah.
But so what would be the purpose of killing children? I just don't understand it, but I do get that it's meant to demonstrate how brutal the WLF is, but to your point, to what end? To what end are they that brutal? Why?
Yeah, I think part of this is, and speaking towards the game, I don't know that the game necessarily showed the brutalization of children, not anything distinct that I can recall. Like, I do recall that, like, people, dead bodies were found, and folks committed suicide or ran off or did other things, but I don't know that they necessarily showed the brutalization of children by that group. But I think,
they really got us to like that little girl,
right?
Redhead. They made her redhead and all that, like, oh, and then she got a hammer, and then like she just dead. And they laid them out like the White Walkers of Game of Thrones, like with their eyes all open and their skin all pale. Damn.
Right.
Yeah.
Very clear.
But I think one of the things that I believe they'll show and we'll see here is not just the brutalization from all parties and all groups, right? Mm-hmm. Joel went into a hospital and in theory killed an unarmed doctor because he wanted to save this girl. So a lot of this is just survival instincts for your group, right? Survival instincts for.
Although when he killed that doctor, the doctor was performing what he believed to be, like doctors make a vow for do no harm, and that was harm. So
the girl had a hammer in her hand and was probably going to grow up to do harm to, it's like.
Yeah. And can you convert someone back from such a religious order that they're using scarification and all that stuff,
And Abby's group wanted to kill Ellie because she might come to do them harm. So like, I think just generally speaking that.
Well, Abby wanted to kill him. The group said no.
Some in the group wanted to kill him. Yeah. But some others.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Because Ellie hurt some people. You're right. It's a whole thing. But yeah, I really feel as if we really need to know more about the Washington Liberation Front, especially because I mean, Abby was like, the person who trained me told me never to hurt unarmed people.
Right.
And the minute she says that, she shoots Joel in the knee, disables him before killing him, which is like not only cruel, but it's a show of weakness. And then on top of all of that, you see, they're killing these children. I mean, these people have hammers. And then when we finally understand that the WLF probably killed them, we see the WLF. They have armored personnel carriers. They have,
Sure.
countless weapons. They're armed to the teeth. Did they really need to murder these people who were seemingly on a way away from them?
Right.
That's a thing. And having gas powered stuff 20 years after civilization is pretty difficult. Gasoline only lasts like 6 months before it doesn't work
Unless
anymore.
they found a way to refine it.
Yeah, they had to find a way to refine things, but I don't really feel like Puget Sound is like the place to like be getting gasoline. So it's just so all I'm saying is that just like Jackson Hole, they have resources.
Right.
They have functioning resources. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the show uncovers them.
I think I've got quite a few interesting or things that I found that were kind of compelling.
Yeah.
I mean, so in terms of there are quite a few differences, as Dwayne noted, between the game and this element, this chapter. I think you are exposed in the game to the Prophet and this other group, and this other group being fairly brutal, but not to this degree where you get to see their perspective. You hear side conversations.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to mention the name of this group because I don't believe they called it out in this episode, but
They didn't. They'll bring it up later. I was debating that too, but I'm glad we're on the same page.
Right. Yeah. So you're more exposed to them via like literature, wall post conversations that are found or overheard while exploring, but not from this like sort of inner personality where they show a bit of light of humanity. So I thought that's quite interesting. And also similarly in the game, there's no vote to like about leaving town. It's just Ellie creates the plan, decides that she wants to go.
Yeah.
Abby comes along. Tommy's wife Maria is the one who initially tries to block him but lets him go. So
and Tommy just does his own thing. Like Tommy's like in the game.
Well, hold on for that for 1 second. Yes, we're gonna hold on for that because
I don't know what's going. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just interesting to see the changes they make. I think a lot of those are to kind of because you have the time here to build character and kind of build character to a degree. So I found those elements interesting. Something else that I found kind of compelling is you mentioned how Tommy left the box with the watch and and the gun.
Stopwatch and the gun.
So Sarah had repaired
that cloth was. It was just some random bit of fabric.
Gun cloth.
I'm not sure.
Maybe.
Okay. All right. Never mind.
Well, Sarah repaired the watch initially, right, and gave it to Joel as a gift. And then Joel had this watch that had gotten damaged, but now Tommy has repaired that watch and leaves it in a box, potentially as a gift for Ellie, kind of sort of continuing this dynamic or story. But instead, she chooses to take the gun. Right. She chooses to take this.
That's the totem that she wants to remember.
It's broken. I'm going to get the gun because the gun works.
Yeah. And this is how I want to remember Joel, by this totem, not the watch.
Right.
Exactly.
Not the watch, but this sort of path of violence that may soon be begotten.
And that's good because it just reminds us that Sarah and Ellie are not the same person, that the relationship was indeed quite different, Yeah.
Another element that was kind of interesting was you already talked about, Tommy cleaning Joel and kind of taking his turn, right, to try and clean a lot of the dirt and often in ways the sins away from Joel, right? He says
he washed him like a baptism almost.
It's very cathartic. It's very ritualistic.
Yeah, it's
right, and mentions about like, hey, hopefully your soul can rest and you can see Sarah. And I think that is, I found that to be a very sort of poignant scene especially given that you have that contrasted fairly quickly from, the pain of that last episode, carried out beginning with Ellie's scream before the opening credits, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So it's so harsh and so rough, and then you get this where there's a bit of cleanliness, a bit of trying to take that away, a bit of trying to, similar to the title, trying to lead the path for Joel to like the afterlife, but also starting this other path for Ellie. It's really interesting because, the previous episode was called Through the Valley, and all of this kind of reminds me of, the biblical verse of through the valley of the shadow of death and the path and all of those elements as we sort of go down this, what seems like inevitable sense of reoccurring destruction,
it's a cycle of doom, right?
Trauma.
A cycle of revenge and trauma and all that stuff.
And the question is, will it just continue? It's interesting, right? Because often these stories of trauma are things that we see commonplace in everyday life, but we show that even in the apocalypse, human nature and the trauma that we cause one another does not change and kind of remains.
Yeah, in fact,
a part of us.
To just piggyback on that, it's a good reminder that in this episode, the only infected we see are the ones that are dead from the attack. There's no interaction with the infected. Not even to seem to really worried about the infected. I mean, they're going out into the wilderness. They're not worried about the infected going all the way 800 miles to Seattle. So the people, the only demons in this episode are people. And the violence of those people is not even seen on camera. We know the violence in Ellie and Dina's heart to take those guys out. We know the violence that Tommy and Seth have in their heart for taking out Abby. And we know the violence that the cult had when they were like, oh, I got hammers, I'm going to take people out with hammers.
Right.
But then we know the violence that was visited upon them. But none of the violence was seen on screen. It's implied. And it can be implied because I think as viewers, we can all recognize what kind of violence that is. So, it's it's pretty bad.
Yeah, a compelling thing that's also different in the game versus here is the Ellie Dina dynamic, right? So in this story, Ellie or Dina is the only one who can make Ellie smile, right? And she says, "You don't need to try," in response to trying to sound like a badass. And so here, as we kind of talked about this ability to develop characters a little bit more, here we're kind of developing their story or potential love interest. In the game, like, they were sort of immediately, they had the reckoning of that first kiss, and they were both together in the, what we'll call the weed house, and had just immediately developed as lovers.
In the game it is way more accelerated, and I think we're actually there. It's the writing here is earning any relationship they have. In fact, I feel like at this point it's unclear whether they're actually going to be in a relationship, because when they were in the tent, Ellie kind of seemed even a little miffed at Dina's thing. And also, is it just me, or does Dina look like a character from that 70s show? Like, she looks like a combination of like two characters. Like the jacket she's wearing is a modern jacket from San Francisco. It's fancy, it's at this point I guess it's 20 years old, but her hair is like perfectly coiffed. Her skin is great despite like the lack of like skincare products in her universe. I just feel like she's like a reminder to me that I'm watching television.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
I mean, maybe she just brought like good product with her when she
was an infant. So instead of like taking a nap, she like decided not to buy a house like the meme goes, but she instead got her beauty product.
She's such a good packer. We saw how efficient she was at telling Ellie what to pack. She just had some extra room for some good hair product. That's all.
I can just imagine her like doing TikToks in the apocalypse behind her doing the makeup while she's talking about her feelings.
Yeah.
I just think it's incredible how I just like a reminder that like we're watching TV, because she's like, even when she wakes up in the morning, and or like they're going to bed or whatever, she just looks like perfect. And like Ellie, as contrast, looks constantly looks like trash. So it's like really, I don't know, it's perfectly done is all I'm saying.
Yeah. So last bit here, when Ellie is at Joel's grave, she spreads coffee seeds.
Yeah, I don't remember
beans,
I don't remember what the significance of that was.
Yeah. So in season 1, episode 4, when they're camping, that was when Ellie woke up and she's like, "Oh, I'm like, what is this terrible smell?" And Joel mentioned like, "Hey,
it's
coffee,
real coffee.
it's something that he loves." So she's trying to, it's a memory that they shared, and it's also something that Joel liked and appreciated, and bringing it back to Earth and giving him sort of the seeds of that drink. So I thought that in fact was pretty touching, and it was kind of a small gesture that I'm just glad I was able to
Where
catch.
do you find coffee beans in the Rockies 25 years after the apocalypse?
Ellie was holding on to those coffee beans all this time just for this.
I know. I mean,
moment.
for all the sort of like, she doesn't give a shit. It's just like Tosin's point is that she really gives a shit.
One of these days, I'm going to bury these coffee beans with Joel, so I need to hang on to them.
Yeah. Well,
or maybe she thinks she might enjoy coffee one of those days.
Or I think they were novel because they smell so interesting, right? Like just beans by themselves, they have a smell. But she's like, these are, take these with you to the afterlife. It's like Tommy was saying, say hi to Sarah in the afterlife. It's this idea that there is an afterlife. But yeah, it's unless they have a hothouse over there, which Jackson could totally have a hothouse. They were growing marijuana, weren't they?
It's true. It's true.
That was incredible. And in other shows, I didn't question some of this stuff, but for some reason, the verisimilitude of The Last of Us, I think it had to do with the episode where we meet the two guys who are living on a compound that they created themselves. It's the idea that they managed to pull together shreds of civilization in this post-apocalyptic world. It's really well done. Well done.
All right, let's talk about some of the technical aspects. This is where we talk about some of the behind-the-scenes elements that we enjoyed in this episode, like music, acting, visual effects, etc. I really have been enjoying Isabella Merced's take on this character, on Dina, and the dynamic that she has with Ellie. I find
it's
her
much more rich than it was in the game.
Is it? I find her so charming, and I feel like there's so much natural chemistry between her and Ellie. Like they really do feel like they've been best friends forever. I totally buy that.
Yeah, so I agree that they have that friend vibe. I do think that the Dina in the game felt more like an NPC. She kind of felt like they're a couple, but she kind of felt there as a vehicle for exploring Ellie's character, whereas this Dina exists on her own, right? Mm-hmm. Like we know her history a little bit with Jesse. We know that she was there and got drugged. We know that she spent 3 months poring over whatever shred of memory she could have while she was drugged to figure out what's going on with what to do about Abby, how to get to Seattle, all those things. So she feels way more fully fledged, which is why she also kind of like, as much as she's like sort of frivolous, hey, I'm going to kiss you. I'm not really gay, but I'm going to kiss you. How was my kiss? That kind of stuff. She is also like concrete, right? So she's like, how do you, she had to go find a map. She had to go figure out how to stay off the roads. This is stuff that is painstaking, especially when you don't have she doesn't have Yahoo Maps, or I'm aging myself, like Wikipedia or whatever.
Ask Jeeves. Come on.
Ask Jeeves. She doesn't have Lycos.
Thomas Guide.
Exactly. But this idea that she's like, granted, one thing that happens when you don't have all the digital distractions is that you can focus. But, they have duties, right? And also there's the fact that we met when we first enter this season. Dina is almost feeling more like a daughter to Joel than Ellie is. And I say that because she's trying to she's learning how electricity works. He's teaching her how a circuit breaker works. This is the kind of stuff that you would assume, if you weren't familiar with all the storylines, that he'd be teaching Ellie, but he's teaching Dina, and she is interested in what the old man has to say, while Ellie is like, screw the old man.
Right.
So she had a relationship with Joel that was real. And so all these things between Jesse, the relationship with Joel, the 3 months of just figuring out how to get these guys, making cookies for Ellie, it just feels very visceral. And also, I feel like, I'm not gonna lie, in the game, Dina and Ellie look a little bit too much alike for me. Like they use the same model, they just change the hair color a little bit or whatever. And so she feels kind of more real to me because she's a completely different human being, right? Yes, they're both dark haired or whatever, but at the same time, she's just everything about her is almost like she's like a ray of light in a very dark place. Right. And you can imagine in the game, obviously that's how Ellie feels about her. But the way that Merced is playing the character, we can all feel that. Like when she comes on screen, you're happy to see her.
Absolutely.
Right? Even though she's got like Jane Fonda hair.
Unrealistic Jane Fonda hair.
Exactly. I think when you're watching the show, you're just watching the show, how is Ellie going to get this close to Dina without telling her a secret? Is that hanging over anyone else's head? Because it's hanging over my head. I'm like, what if they, when they get hot and heavy and the bite mark or whatever, she obviously cut it, so it's not really a bite mark, but she's going to ask about it. How can you want someone the way she seems to want Dina without wanting to tell her, right? So I thought that was.
I think that'll come in time.
Sure, it'll come, but it's hanging. It's making me anxious.
Sure.
I'm pausing because of this.
Yeah, one thing I saw that was kind of interesting to me was I think, unfortunately, the visual effects in some shots did kind of, you could tell that it was VFX versus like characters actually being there. But at least in Seattle, they had the Space Needle in the distance, and I was like, okay, that's Seattle, and
Yeah, I'm familiar with Seattle. I go at least once a
huge
year,
matte painting, though. It looked like huge, like But what do you?
At least it looked worn down.
Yeah.
And the fact that the military organization is using the Space Needle as a lookout point, and they're checking in with one another is also useful. Because I remember with Jackson, I'm like, why are they doing these patrols? This seems like a waste of resources. And then you realize it's important because bad guys are lurking.
Sure.
And now these guys are doing their checks. They've got their walkie-talkies. They're doing all that stuff. And that's huge. The thing about the Space Needle is, you look at those buildings, and it wasn't like a nuclear weapon went off. They just degraded over time because they haven't been maintained. The Space Needle is not exactly the stirdiest looking structure in the world.
No.
So like climbing up all those steps, because the elevator's probably not working, to be on what's clearly like, parts of it have been shorn off. He's like, he's exposed to the weather. I'm like, I don't know that I'd be up that Space Needle.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd use whatever resources I can to put some sort of like camera up there and see what I could see.
Yeah, I would not be comfortable up there at all.
Exactly.
I've got some unanswered questions. So I think the first one is pretty obvious in that I think it's just going to be something that's going to be revealed later on in the show. But who are these? I have no idea who these religious acolytes are. What's with their ritualistic facial scars? Who's the prophet? What's interesting about this whole thing to me is that this feels like something that I would expect from a different story, a different property, something like Mad Max, or even, I don't know, even The Walking Dead. But like up until now, like season 1 of The Last of Us has been very grounded, and the factions that we've encountered have been survivors like Joel and Ellie, or hunters, raiders, but nothing that really feels like it's rooted in any sort of like cult or faith-based.
So here's where I would say this actually feels way more grounded than those other things. So in Mad Max, once we get to the point where we're seeing Fury Road, people have to believe in something. So they believe in Immortan Joe, who has water.
Sure.
and his acolytes, the guys who like say witness me, I forgot what they're called. They have him raised up as a sort of god. And in fact, when they say witness me, it's because they believe they're going to some afterlife or something, right? When they sacrifice themselves for Immortan Joe's, for his like power, right? They're sacrificing himself so that he can win whatever battle or that kind of thing. When you have hard times, people tend to believe in something. Every single religion that is extant today is extant. It exists because there was a time when we didn't have the luxuries of science and technology, and things were hard. You know, when you think about Judaism and Islam and even early Christianity, the idea that you're not supposed to eat a pig doesn't come just out of nowhere. It comes from the fact that like people didn't know how to cook a pig, so they'd get ringworm or whatever you get when you eat pork when you don't cook pork properly. People you had to figure out how to kill the cows, slaughter things properly. You had to bleed them out because you didn't want the blood to get like bacteria and whatever. You had to make sure you dried the meat effectively in order to make it preserve longer.
Sure.
So these things get built into religious rituals. And so when things are hard and people need something to believe, when times get hard, demagogues can show up and tell people a story about how everyone's out to get them. The opposite happens when things get hard for some people, which is to say we have a person who understands truths that we don't necessarily see. And these truths are things we can follow, sort of like scientific theories. Like when you ask all the questions, they're not disproved. And so by having faith and finding your people who share your faith, you're able to consolidate a group, and that group can survive. So I think the religious thing actually makes a ton of sense in a world that is like 25 years post-apocalyptic. You're going to have your like military survivors with all their gear, and you're going to have your people who believe in Christ. And even Seth is like, he's the reason why he's a bigot to the two girls at first is in large part because he's still holding on to some of his beliefs from back in the day when civilization was a thing. And people, different groups of people didn't believe that being same-sex couple was right. And so it's actually a big and surprising thing when he's like, I shouldn't have even thought it, because you're like, who says that? People think what they want to think. But he also recognizes that this group is the group he has to survive with. That group, they're cutting themselves in their cheeks to show each other that they're committed to whatever the prophet is about.
Sure.
And the guys are shaving their heads to that effect. The girls are putting their hair in a crown, and all that stuff, like the hair in a crown and the long skirts. That's like symbols of. Those things are universal symbols of sort of like propriety or effectively like, not being conservative about your sexual and gender stuff, because in a society that's like most societies that survived, it was very much about like, we're going to put a man with a woman and they're going to make more babies, and that's how we're going to have more people, and the more people we have, the stronger we'll be when we come up against other groups, that kind of thing. So
it just feels to me like the trappings of a different property and not what I've
the world is big and diverse is what I'm seeing out of it. If there was tons of religious groups, it'd be like a little confusing. But the fact that this is like one group that's on the run, I mean, they're doing an exodus. They're doing like Hebrews leaving Egypt. So they're definitely not super popular, but they're. I saw the parallel with the group leaving, the Jews leaving Egypt. I see the parallels with what Tosin's talking about with the titles of the episodes, tying sort of like biblical ideas. Sure. And I feel like it's a good thing to have, so that we can talk about how it's always played into our societies, even if it feels a little backward to a lot of people who are kind of like thinking about the more mechanized. WLF or the sort of like town situation that's going on with Jackson. So I thought it made sense. And I thought it made sense that it was kind of a ragtag group of civilians, effectively, right?
Yeah.
So that kind of makes sense. But we'll see kind of what the WLF believe.
I'm really curious about that, to see what that world building is like and what their manifestos are. And the last question that I have, really, and maybe you guys can answer this, is more of a technical thing, I think, more than anything else, is that why did they bury everyone so far away from their town? 10 miles, like 1 or 2 miles, even half a mile I can see, but 10 miles away from Jackson.
Did you see how fast those zombies came back running?
Yeah, but I mean, they don't have to worry about. Is that what it is? Is they're burying them that far because the bodies are infected and they don't want to infection.
Take no chances, right?
Oh.
Always double tap.
Right?
I think that's probably part of it here. Whereas the dead. They've watched enough zombie movies growing up. And they've seen enough weird oddities and enough new types of zombies and hearing other things that, even seeing their tactics of hiding under bodies, that like it's just a safety first. Honestly, they probably
land
should
in and
just
around
burn them, to be honest. But
maybe I think land in and around Jackson. Right now, Jackson Hole's real estate is quite the commodity. I think when you're Jackson and you're growing, when people keep on coming, right? People, that was the whole thing when Joel was alive. People keep on coming. You bury them 10 miles out in part because you don't know where you're going to be in 10 years. The geographical layout of the town right now, they have the fence going between basically two rising mountains, and then there's a big expanse in front of them. They can move the fence forward, so many. Kilometers, whatever, and then build it wider, and then have the 2 layers of fence. They're going to grow. So I think what Tosin said is correct. You never know what's going to happen. And on the other hand, too, like you don't really bury people because they don't have coffins. They're not making coffins. They're like wrapping them up in muslin and putting them in the ground.
Sure.
That could affect your groundwater.
That actually makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Like that
you need them
to me
far enough away
feels like a legit
to make sure that and you don't want to put them next to a river because you don't want them in that water either. So you kind of have to so there's some considerations. I don't know exactly what the thinking is, but I feel like between all the things we just said, it kind of makes sense to get them 10 miles out. And also there's this idea of resting. So their cemeteries usually on the edges of towns because those people are supposed to be resting, that kind of thing. So there's that. I have a question.
Sure. Yeah.
Why are they on one horse? Is it because they lost the horse last episode?
No, I didn't. Dina explain that it's less resources?
Kind of. I mean, horses eat grass, and they're going north to Seattle. There's a lot of green where they're going, but more than all that, okay. So if you're like a geek and you've read fantasy stories or anything, the hero has their horse like Gandalf and Shadowfax. Sure. But in reality, when you were in horse times and you were trying to travel pretty far, you'd go to whatever inn or stable was within range, just kind of like how if you're in an electric car, or a gas car, you have to go to a fill-up station, and you'd usually trade your horse. You'd trade your horse in for an equivalent horse. Oh. And then you keep on going because horses are not vehicles. They can't really, they get tired, they can go lame, and then they have to be healed, that kind of thing. So the idea that the horse, and the girls are not, the girls are women, right? The women are not exactly big. So, maybe they weigh a $120 a piece, maybe less. But still 2 people in all their gear on one horse, that really slows that horse down. Also, there are some benefits. So, for instance, one person could be guiding the horse with the reins while the other person can be shooting with a rifle. That's kind of nice. But that horse is going to have to rest even longer every night because they're carrying 2 people. 2 people are shifting, right? 2 people are moving around on its back. Horses are strong. There's no doubt. But at the same time, the one horse, it kind of was a surprise. It's certainly intimate, and that's one of the goals of this part of the show, making sure that these two people become intimate. But yeah, I thought it was weird that they had one horse, and I'm not over the fact that the continuity editor They didn't figure, like, I was on Reddit.
By the way, it is one horse in the game as well too. So
I know it's one horse in the game, but given what we've seen of Jackson and given what they've changed, I'm like, you're gonna give him 2 horses. But I was with a friend today.
Yeah.
She was looking at like houses with like a realtor, and the realtor, who's also a friend, was like, "What happened to the other horses?" And I was like,
From
"It's all over."
last
Like,
episode.
thank God. Her daughters were calling her like, "Mom, where are the horses?" And I'm in Colorado, and this is horse country.
Yeah.
So the discussion about horses has gone really just it's extensive out here. But yeah, so they could do it on one horse. It doesn't seem like the best move. Maybe they were trying to keep a low profile when they ran away. Really, they did lose 2 horses last time, so maybe they're not responsible horses. I don't know. I just feel like the one horse, it stuck out as like, why?
Any last game differences you want to talk about before we close off this episode?
Yeah. So in the game, Ellie isn't in the hospital for 3 months after Joel dies. She kind of goes after them the next day. In fact, can I bring up Tommy, Tosin?
I would not.
Okay, I'm not going to bring up Tommy.
Because there's a ton there.
All right. There's a ton there. But in the game, you can see that I remember her face was like hit or something. Like her ear was bleeding. I don't know what it was, but you could tell that it was like it hadn't healed. And after 3 months, you're healed, right? So it very much wasn't that. But that also makes sense because if you're playing a game, unless they want to do a time skip with the cutscene 3 months later, you're not really interested in running around the town for the equivalent of 3 months, or maybe like creating gameplay from other characters where Ellie is recovering for 3 months. Like you just want to keep on going. So it kind of makes sense to do that. But I think the show made a really smart move, because by the time Ellie gets up, she is still experiencing it as if it happened yesterday, because she's been unconscious for so long, and the town has moved on. And when I say moved on, they've buried the bodies. They're rebuilding the thing. The palisades, stockade, whatever you want to call that fence, is back up.
They've started off junior softball teams.
Their junior softball team is going. They're really trying to figure out how to recover.
Right.
And Ellie, the hurt is so new, to the point where when they're in council, not just the council that votes, but the people who are talking are like, yeah, Joel's dead and we're sad about it. And, if you think about it, they all put their flowers and teddy bears or whatever against his fence.
Right.
And those flowers, some of them were new, but some of them were rotting. So people had been paying their respects for a while. They are over Joel's death. And while Ellie's little speech was brilliant lies, right? We need justice for him because who are we if we don't protect each other? Which is reflected with the whole, like, everyone has a hammer in the cult because who are we if we don't protect each other?
Yeah.
But it's this idea that, like, she is, like, seething. And Dina, who cares about her, is like, I know she's going to be seething, so I'm going to figure out how to do this. And Jesse, who also cares about her, is like, I don't know if I'm going to vote for you, but I got to tell you how to approach this so you actually have the best chance of doing it.
Right.
And like Tommy voted yes for the posse, but Tommy's also like, I got a kid now. The Tommy of the show is like, I got a wife, I got a kid. I can't be out there, trying to take out people in Seattle 800 plus miles away. Right. And then there's the fact that the woman said, if we send 16 of our best with no guarantee they're coming back. Right. It's not like people grow on trees. We don't live in a world of
who's going to watch
8
us
billion
here
people anymore. 9 billion people. So it's just like from a resource perspective, it's crazy to send all that out there to take care. What's better is to hunker down. Theoretically, what's better is to hunker down. And the guy who talked about mercy, that is a technique that communities have used to not expend resources on revenge. Right? They don't deserve our love and they don't deserve not to have justice, but we're going to extend mercy and we're going to make sure that we're prepared if anyone should ever come back. I mean, it's funny because after you see that WLF, march on the move, you do wonder if WLF showed up at the gates of Jackson. It's given Jackson's defenses, given how pretty armed to the teeth those guys were, who would win that fight?
Good question.
Maybe we'll see something like that kind of thing. But yeah, so it made a lot of sense that Ellie was like, what the hell? And it actually made Ellie less of a jerk because she's like, What the hell? Nobody wants to do the Joel thing, whereas everyone's like, we care about Joel, but it's over, you know? So
Yeah.
we've all lost people.
But maybe time to hang back and rebuild.
And I mean, how would you have voted, Tosin?
That's a good question, but for now, I'm not going to actually answer that question. Because,
You're not going to answer how you would have voted if it were 3 months after the attack on the thing, and your friend, your maybe
it's an anonymous vote, and I feel like in my explanation of things, I would reveal too much about what I know in this series. So
I'll say just straight up, like in the abstract, I would have voted no. I would have been like, I want us to be as prepared as possible so that when we're on patrol, we can't get, tricked or taken down like Joel was taken down. But, I just feel like you got a town that survived this thing. Jackson is it. Jackson's like the last best. It's Babylon 5. It's the last best chance for humanity. So I feel like you can't be ranging that far out, People keep on coming to you. If people keep on coming to you, then that's great. One more thing.
Yeah.
All those dead, infected people who were attacking last time, right? It's kind of like where'd they come from? And part of the question was it because the fungus was like, hey, yo, I need you to get over here because we see movement. But part of it also was that, you remember how they said that all these people kept on showing up? Like real people, living people kept on showing up. Migrants were showing up. And
right.
Joel was like, you can't take them. If migrants are making it there because civilizations or settlements are falling, you have to think that if the few are making it to Jackson, the many are falling. And if they're falling, you get a lot of dead around Jackson. So that was one thing that kind of came to my head. Not necessarily like right next to Jackson, like what happened. But, you get a lot of dead that are nearby enough for the cordyceps to say, come on, let's move you guys this way.
Right.
So that's all I'm saying. So that's something just from last week that came to me during the course of the week.
And I think that's going to do it for this episode of Quarantine Zone. I'm going to go around the table here, and I'm going to ask, starting with you, Dwayne, where can people find your work on the internet when you're not talking about The Last of Us?
Just you can check me out on Blue Sky, and I'm Dwayne D. Yeah, I don't post that often, but yeah, see what I gotta say. Tosin, what about you?
You can find me at Instagram at burnttoast45. What about yourself, Andy?
My social media handle is Mr. Babyman. You can find me on all the social medias there. Again, not posting very often recently, but maybe that'll change sometime in the near future. For as far as our show goes, we are on X and Blue Sky at QZ Pod. We're in all the major podcast distribution networks. Drop us an email, tweet us, leave us a comment on iTunes, add us on Spotify, and otherwise we will see you after the next episode of The Last of Us here on Quarantine Zone. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys.